Please help me to welcome Diane.
Hi, everyone. Hey. Okay, yeah. When I was a child, my favourite book was The Faraway Tree. In it, a group of children discover a fantasy land atop a magical big oak tree. There they can escape their ordinary world. Stripped from their expectations and roles, they find themselves braver, stronger, and more resourceful. Up in the faraway tree, they can be whoever they want to be. I often wished I could be someone else. Someone tougher, someone louder, less sensitive. I never understood why my quiet personality was such a problem. I never even thought I was quiet. I was just me. Who else? I longed to be free from that box, to escape the limiting idea of who I am. Around me, I watched other people telling stories about real life. They weren't telling lies exactly. They believed them to be true. The problem was their stories were hurting themselves and causing them to suffer. I remember thinking, I'm glad I don't do that. I'm glad I'm not crazy like them. I was so fascinated by this inner storytelling that I returned to university to study for a PhD. I fantasized about sitting under a big tree, reading and having great thoughts. But after 3 years of interviewing people and napping under that tree, I realized my role as a researcher was to make meaning from people's stories. The tough part came when I had to find a conclusion, to come up with a single story. But what I discovered was this: there are multiple versions of the truth, and each version of truth feels very true to the person holding it. And those different versions can change the meaning of one single event into something good or something bad. The only conclusion I could make is that we all view life through our own lens. We all choose certain information to focus on and other pieces of information to conveniently ignore. We make meaning about what's going out there from our inner beliefs in here, and we filter everything, and that shapes the way we see the world. In the middle of my PhD, under a pile of other people's stories, I got sick and didn't get better for 2 years. Forced to stay in bed away from other people, I couldn't even hold up a book. It was my own personal vipassana of hell. But away from other people with all the alone time, the ideas I held about myself broke down. Insulated from other people's stories about who I was, I found a new vision for my life. In it was less fear and more adventure, less guilt and more saying yes to myself. I discovered that I felt freer as I recovered, freer from the box. And I noticed that my inside story was growing really strong. But I had two competing stories about the meaning of my illness. One was the lost years, featuring all the things I was missing out on as a sick 25-year-old. And the other was my spiritual time out, guest starring Oprah and a brief cameo by Anthony Robbins. Now, both stories were actually true. It's just one turned fear into hope. And this hopeful story took me to leave my home country of England and move to Australia. Now, I never would have imagined I would have been brave enough to do this before I was ill. So, like the faraway tree, a faraway place appealed to me. So I moved to this land of oak trees and hot air balloons, and the box felt so much bigger away from home. But even there, after a few years, my life started to change. My marriage ended, and I felt my identity slipping away from me. It was both exciting and extremely terrifying. But then another wave hit. My career, always the strong story of my life, also started to crumble. I stopped winning, and I had no idea who I was. I felt overwhelmed by outside stories. For the first time in my life, people were saying I was failing in my relationship, my career, everything I'd set out to achieve. I couldn't maintain my inside story. And without a hopeful story to cling onto, I had to agree with them that I was indeed failing. So pushed out of my old life, I landed in Bali. And we do strange things in times of transition. We move to warmer climates, we swap paid work for writing a book, and we even learn to hula hoop. And from the outside world, it looks like we are escaping reality. And in some ways, we are. We are escaping a story that no longer fits us and searching for a new one. Now, transition is a very vulnerable time. We are between stories. It's a time that we're most exposed to outside stories, and we can be ashamed of our journey. And we're especially terrified of trying to answer that question, what are you doing now? What we really need to do is to reframe failure. Now, this starts with realising that maybe we didn't fail after all. Maybe things had to fall apart. It also involves taking responsibility for our actions, but also letting go the parts that are out of our control. It is only then that we can find a hopeful story that focuses less on the disappointments and more on the opportunities. Most importantly, we need to trust in the bigger story, the one we can't even see yet. As our old story breaks away, new invitations arrive to visit new places, meet new people, pursue new careers, and even have new ideas that never would have happened in the old story, knowing that it's probably only in hindsight that we'll glimpse the meaning of it all. Now, Bali turned out to be a lot like the fantasy land at the top of the faraway tree. I got many chances to reinvent myself, to try on new clothes, new job titles, and even new personas. And besides from learning how to pose in front of a swimming pool, the thing I learned most was how to live without a box, how to let go of my identity and move forward even without knowing my bigger story. What I've realised recently is transition is a constant. We have to get comfortable with being a collection of hyphens. And if we're going to really live our lives and really thrive, we've got to let go of that need to know exactly who we are at any point in time. Now, let's face it, we're never going to stop telling stories. We just have to remember that we're always being selective. We're always choosing what to focus on and what to leave out of our stories. So what's really important is that we choose a meaning that empowers us to feel good about ourselves and to make the best of our lives. Now, the answer is to rescript our stories as our life changes. And if we're doing life right, we're always going to be outgrowing that box, and we're always going to be in need of a new story. What we really need to do is grow our inside stories, deliberately choose hopeful stories, and inspire others with the stories we tell.